Hey everybody, welcome to BK Live. I'm Brian Bynes.
And I'm Melody Vargas. Hello, Brooklyn.
Happy Super Tuesday.
It's Super Tuesday.
Tuesday is always super with Melody
It's
here.
true. It's true. And I'm rarely here on a Tuesday these days.
Is it?
Look at
Well,
this special occasion.
If we were in Alabama, what's another one?
Arkansas.
Alabama, Arkansas, Alaska, Georgia, Massachusetts, in alphabetical order, mind you. Minnesota, Oklahoma, Tennessee, Texas, Vermont, Virginia. They're having some crazy weather in some of those states, but they're still expecting record turnouts in the Super Tuesday contest. And they're dividing up all these delegates. The state with the most delegates, you want to take a guess? I'll play Alex Trebek like I knew, but I just looked at my cheat sheet.
Just tell me.
Tejas.
I was going to guess Tejas, but I wasn't sure it was on the list.
Sure.
It's a big one.
Texas, she doesn't listen to me.
Texas,
They get 155 delegates today. The state with the fewest. You want to redeem yourself?
Arkansas.
Virginia. No, Vermont, actually. Vermont has 16 delegates. So we'll be watching.
That was my next guess.
We'll be watching. Happy Super Tuesday to y'all out there watching us on YouTubes.
Get out there and vote, y'all, if
BRIC.org.
you are affiliated with a party. Otherwise, don't go. Won't be worth it. Okay, in the 30 years since the war on drugs began and harsh mandatory minimum sentences were imposed for low-level offenses, the national prison population has exploded.
Woof.
But as of late, many on both sides of the aisle in politics and law have argued there's an immediate need to reform these laws. Each state does it differently. Some use sentencing guidelines, some have mandatory minimums. As part of our lead up to our town hall on the impact of mass incarceration on March 24th, we'll talk to two attorneys well versed in the ins and outs of sentencing reform here in New York.
That's right, and all sorts of evidence shows that people who live secure and stable childhoods are far less likely to end up in the criminal justice system. But does that also apply to the moment when you actually come into this world? Well, in Bed-Stuy, there's a collective that trains women to help other women give birth safely and naturally. It's called Ancient Song Doula, and we'll show you how it works.
Meanwhile, all those babies are going to need blankets, right?
Presumably.
So we'll also introduce you to a new business that's all about knitting. Two women, both originally from France, but New Yorkers now, have gathered together a group of mostly retired grandmothers who knit, and later on we'll take you behind the skeins, you know, like a skein of wool.
Oh, no.
They made me say that.
Moving on. More women doing good now. Two sisters from Brooklyn have made it their mission to help school children in Liberia, where they happen to have been born, and they'll be here in the studio to tell us how they're going about it. And later on, a writer and director who's doing a BRIC Lab residency will tell us about her work in progress, which takes us back to the Iranian hostage crisis of 35 years ago.
Happy anniversary. But up first, our conversation on sentencing reform right after this.
This elevator is where I was shot. There's three of us in here, and a homeboy of mine had a gun, and he pulled it out, and he was just like trying to, like, you know, he was just messing with it, and I guess it went off, and I was standing right here, and the gun went off.
So early on, I was mainly inspired by the idea of migration, deportation. So many Armenians in their works, in their artwork, somehow they reflect on this issue.
So why don't we have you try this on in the fitting room?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously I'm a little nervous, and because it's the first time I'm doing such a thing, and I know that I'm probably gonna like experience some backlash from the community if once they know that I do this.
All these really yummy items. Our chocolate chip cookie with sea salt is a favorite. We have, you know, amazing organic cakes, but they are actually the proverbial icing on the cake. We do much more than just serve baked goods.
I walk around with sneakers all day, every day, either in a book bag or a little duffel bag with me, because I feel that we live in a city where you're always going to find homeless people. Some people are like, why would you take it? What if you don't find them? You're going to find them. The point is, do you have enough for them?
today we have a phenomenal A block that's all about sentencing reform. So a little bit of news you can use before we get into the conversation. Starting off here with our first slide. We are number one. It is a dubious distinction, but the U.S. has 2.3 million people behind bars right now. That's more than any other country in the world. Mandatory minimum sentences in the 80s helped to contribute to that population. As a matter of fact, in the 80s, federal prison populations ballooned from about 24,000 to over 214,000 folks in the federal prison system. To put that into perspective, in the U.S., there are about 1 in every 100 folks in our country is an inmate somewhere. Sentences for both nonviolent and violent crimes have grown at about the same rates. Moving on to our second slide here, we're still number one, and there's no parole in the federal criminal justice system. Those mandatory minimums mean that folks have to serve a certain percentage of their time, and there's definitely not any parole there. Half of all federal prisoners are serving sentences for drugs. We know all about those Rockefeller laws here in New York State and how they impacted us. Same thing on the federal level. And in 2012, 90% of all federal offenders received a sentence of imprisonment. That means only 10% of folks walked out of the courtroom not going into jail. Last slide here coming up. The advocate wish list. There are a lot of good, well-meaning people on both sides of the aisle working for sentencing reform, and on their wish list are avoiding new mandatory minimum sentences, giving judges more leeway in how folks are prosecuted or penalized, actually. They want to address the special needs of those who are addicted or mentally ill, veterans, and survivors of domestic abuse who get caught up in the penal system. Federal focus prison resources on kingpins and major drug offenders and runners, folks who are at the top of that pyramid, not people who have low-level offenses. But they also want to focus special attention also on people who commit gun crimes and gun violence, looking at applying minimums to them and avoiding unfair limitations on just who qualifies for the relief that would come from these reforms. So take you back to our title page. We're talking sentencing reform in a country where more people are in prison than any other place in the world. Melody.
So that's the national story, but New York has been and continues to be a hotspot in the war on drugs. To help us analyze how the state sentencing guidelines work and how reform would apply to our local laws, we're joined by Kate Mogilescu, supervising attorney for the Legal Aid Society. Welcome. Thank you. And we want to welcome back civil rights attorney Nicole Bellina, partner at Stoll, Glickman, and Bellina. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you.
Thank you both for joining us. So you guys are both lawyers. What's the most common sentencing problem you guys face on a regular basis?
I'd say on the felony level, on the more serious offense level, the biggest issue is not having any discretion. Clients and people who are charged with crimes have all kinds of different issues that bring them into a courtroom. And those issues are often involve mental illness. It can involve all kinds of things but unfortunately, the mandatory laws and sentencings really restrict the court's ability to look at individual cases and be flexible on how to deal with them.
So I watch a lot of Law and Order. So that's my that's my main reference point. But do you feel like judges feel like their hands are tied? Because I'm sure, knowing that there are these minimums, you still present sort of mitigating things. But do judges ever express, I'm sorry, this is just the way it is?
Absolutely. I mean, what we see on the state level, in addition, is that prosecutors hold a lot of the control. They control charges. They control ultimately what charges people are facing in the courtroom, and that directly impacts what sentence you might be eligible for. So judges feel a lot of frustration because really they can't wrest that power out of the hands of the prosecutor, even in a case where they do think someone might be deserving or merit a lesser sentence. So prosecutorial discretion plays a huge role in how cases are resolved and what ultimately people are sentenced to.
So the prosecutors actually have more power than the judges then, because they're the ones who bring the charges.
In many instances, yes. In many instances, yes. And so, sentencing reform, while critical, both at the federal and state level, I mean, you mentioned the Rockefeller drug framework, it's a very important part of our criminal justice reform, but there are many other examples of dynamics in the criminal justice system that need to similarly be examined if we're going to really get at who is in jail and why. And sentencing reform doesn't quite encompass all of that.
Like what, Kate?
Well, there are a few things that come to mind immediately. The first is, we've already talked about prosecutorial discretion, bail reform, right? You need to understand how it is that people even end up getting sentenced. So many cases in our criminal justice system are resolved by guilty pleas, right? Cases don't proceed to trial. Law and Order does do us a disservice here
Everyone
with those
gets their day in court.
the dramatic trial moments that end each episode, right? That doesn't actually come to pass in criminal court. Many cases are resolved by plea bargaining, and one of the biggest factors as to why someone may ultimately accept a plea
To get off Rikers.
is if they are detained awaiting trial. Bail reform, right? Keeping people incarcerated while they are awaiting trial because they cannot afford to pay bail.
Right.
Is a critical point at the process that we need to be looking at. Similarly, funding indigent defense systems, making sure that lawyers for people who cannot afford them are competent, are resourced, and can really test the validity of the charges that are brought against someone. That's another point that deserves more attention and scrutiny in the conversation.
So looking at these reform efforts, we were reading about these sort of two roadblocks. One, the law and order types who don't want to appear soft on crime, and another of this sort of like add-on of the mens rea whole issue of getting corporate people a sort of shield against prosecution. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, the issue, I mean, specifically about the mens rea issue, I mean, it is completely a red herring in this argument about the federal bill that's hopefully going to pass, and it's a great step forward. I think it's really just a way to, sneak in something that's really not relevant.
It has nothing to do with it.
It has nothing to do with it. It really is completely unrelated and shouldn't stop that bill whatsoever. As far as the other issue, right, it's a common concern that we always hear when you talk about sentencing reform, and that's this, it's going to be soft on crime. And I feel like everyone keeps saying the same thing, which is we're mostly talking about nonviolent offenders. All the statistics, all of the studies show that the community is in fact safer when we help people come back into our communities in a safe, healthy way with resources and support. It keeps all of us safer as it keeps the recidivism rate down. So that argument fails every time, but it seems to always come up anyway.
Right, because that's the other thing. How does our sentencing structure affect people's lives afterwards?
Drastically. On the sort of small scale, people who are doing, a year or less, let's say, on a sentence, housing is the first huge thing. You come out of jail, you can't go back to your housing most of the time. You've lost your place, you've lost, your family connections. Sometimes even the simplest, smallest things like your property. I've had so many clients who spend, 60 days, 90 days in jail. They come out. Now, what happened to that room they were renting that now they've been kicked out of? Now their ID is gone. Without ID, you can't get resources. I mean, it's just a vicious cycle. And we have, on a bigger scale, people who are doing longer sentences in state facilities. There's a lot of rules now about when you come out of jail where you can live. For example, even low-level sex offenders, they can't live near a school, or they can't live near here. There are many inmates who are still in jail upstate past their sentences because they can't find quote-unquote approved housing.
So
it happens all the time.
3/4 and the halfway house that you need as a part of your readjustment. And they have to stay there on our dime as a taxpayer. So in the same sort of vein, we had a conversation here last week about Rikers and the push to close Rikers. And just this seems like one of the factors in sort of doing an in-run around even closing Rikers. If we can reform sentencing before people get stuck in that log jam. So what do you guys think about this as a possible solution, or at least something to help ease the problem at Rikers, the sentencing reform?
So, I think sentencing reform would work together with bail reform and the other things we've talked about to reduce the jail population at Rikers. It would directly apply to people who are awaiting trial on felony charges. The bigger question in my mind is how we reduce the jail population for people who are facing lesser offenses, lower level offenses, misdemeanors, which is a significant number of people in our city, right? Misdemeanor policing, which has really governed our policing strategy in New York City for the last 20 plus years, right, puts a lot of people in jail for low-level offenses as well. Sentencing reform won't address that. The only thing that will realistically address that is a change in our policing strategy.
This is broken windows strategy.
Exactly. So while sentencing reform is important for people facing felony offenses, people who are arrested on lower-level crimes.
Just the point of entry stuff.
Exactly. Exactly.
Last year, Cuomo said that the revisions to the Rockefeller drug laws had taken out a lot of nonviolent inmates from our prison system, and it just doesn't seem like that's really what we're seeing or hearing. Is that true, that 18,000 nonviolent inmates were released in the past few years?
I think there has been a decrease, and that's something that politicians can certainly, hang their hat on to say it's been that there's been a decrease. But again, I think it's looking at mostly upstate prison populations. It's not looking at what most of us hear about all the time, which is the Rikers population. None of that touched what's happening at Rikers, and of course, there's always still a lot of movement that we need.
So on the same vein, this was just something like reading one of the rags on the way in the other day. There's this ad here for the Department of Corrections. And like New York is sort of bucking the trend because our populations are going lower in people incarcerated, but we're still preparing by recruiting folks to become corrections officers. They have full-page ads saying, come take the test, we're going to be hiring these people. But I can't think of the last time I saw one of these for teachers or people who are doing public service in a way that's not penalizing folks. Is this any sort of indicator of what the environment is like that you're trying to work in?
I mean, I think that there is a tremendous economic dependency between certain sectors and our prison, our prison industrial complex, right? We know that the employment that's generated by jails and prisons is significant, and it's significant to certain communities that do actually need employment.
The economy of some places. Yeah.
So I don't want to be dismissive of that. I'm not sure that the ad is necessarily an indicator of the Rikers Island jail population increasing or decreasing. I mean, we see what the general trends are there. But there is a constant need for people to work in jails and prisons because there are constantly people entering jails and prisons.
And I think it's a very tough job, and there's a lot of turnover. And when a lot of people talk about closing Rikers and making it a safer place, it's also about making it a safer place for the correction officers who are there trying to do the right thing. Yeah. And they will benefit by less people in jail. They will benefit by, maybe a smaller facility where they know the inmates, where they know, that you can build relationships. They will benefit by better security so that there's not, weapons and drugs and all kinds of things getting smuggled in. So I think they have a lot of turnover because it is a difficult job, and that's part of why, there is this movement to try to shut down Rikers and make things better.
So if we're sort of in a critical place, do some triage for a second. Where would you put the resources immediately from your perspectives? Like you talked about that three-headed monster, the sentencing, the bail stuff. Like where should we focus our money and our attention right now?
I think on the bail reform and we have to look at reducing the population on Rikers, and by doing that is by sentencing reform in the misdemeanor context, as we were talking about. You will see individuals come through the system who get arrested over and over again for small things, jumping a turnstile, a small amount of drugs, maybe selling a small amount of marijuana, and there's no options of what to do with these individuals. And so what happens? I'll give you 30 days this time. You just got arrested 6 months ago, 45 days this time, right? And it just snowballs, and their rap sheets are getting thicker, so each time they get arrested, it gets worse, and the population in Rikers continues to balloon with all of these small sentences because there's no other options. It's literally the courts, they just don't know what else to do with these kinds of individuals that are just getting recycled through the system. I think that would be a fantastic place to focus some energy.
Okay.
I would also suggest that, given exactly what you've identified, right, the large number of people who are currently incarcerated or who have been incarcerated, we need to focus some resources on what is now termed reentry, right? Eliminating barriers for those people that have formerly been incarcerated or are coming home soon from obtaining employment, right, pursuing education, obtaining stability in their lives that often so many obstacles are presented by the mere fact that they have a criminal record, right? We see this devastating impact time and time and time again. So there's great movement in some states to limit the way employers can discriminate on the basis of a criminal record, but our
the
discussion,
box.
yeah,
Yep.
but our discussion needs to go here. There are so many barriers on formerly incarcerated people that if we're really thinking about changing direction here, we must provide resources and support for people coming home.
Right.
Thank
Right,
you.
especially when we're also talking about things like addiction or mental illness or a history of abuse, you know? From giving a massage to providing water to just speaking in a soothing voice, a doula is trained to be there for a mother before, during, and after giving birth. But it's a luxury not all expectant moms can afford, and in Bed-Stuy, one organization is working to train more doulas and make them available to a broader spectrum of women. Take a look.
The reality is that the individual that you start out being, once you have a baby, you are not that same person. You don't perceive the world the same way. You don't look at the individuals in your lives the same way. You don't feel the same way yourself, right? And as a doula, it is our job to kind of be the guide through that and whatever that looks like for that individual. Ancient Song's capacity and role as doulas goes beyond and extends beyond just what a typical doula service is. You know, we're not going to see someone for like 2 to 3 visits and then, we're on call for 24 hours and then we go to birth and then we see you twice and then that's it. Like it extends to more than that, because family is complex.
Your care provider was called and you're ready to go. Your bag is done, you're ready to go. And at that point, you're probably gonna need comfort measures, and that could take different forms. It could be positions that you yourself do, like squatting.
So beforehand, I didn't think I qualified to have a doula, and the reason I thought that and believed that was because I think I put myself in the category of being too vulnerable to qualify for a doula. And I also put doulas in the category of maybe a specific, affluent culture that are only, given to certain people. I thought to myself, I'm on Medicaid, I probably don't get a doula. Which looking back now is funny because that wasn't the case and that's obviously not the situation. So it's really wonderful and validating for me because I think this is a service that every woman should have. And so knowing that anybody can qualify to have a doula and everybody should have that type of support is really important for me and I think really empowering for women.
Ancient Song's mission is to offer all, regardless of socioeconomic standing, quality doula care and the information they need to make an informed decision about their care. We never turn anybody away. I'm gonna say that again. Never turn anybody away. In New York, when you have doulas who charge $5,000 for their services, which is fine, I have nothing wrong with that. That's but that you're serving a certain population of individuals. There is something wrong when we again make it a commodified luxury and don't realize that there's other people who deserve the same level of care. When I go and I see a mom who may be living in a shelter, but does that mean that she shouldn't get the care that she deserves because her housing may not necessarily be adequate? Or if you have someone who may have a substance abuse or usage problem, but they're actively seeking out care, right? They're being an active participant in their lives, but they're on Medicaid. Does that mean that they should receive any less dignity in the way in which they birth their children? Ancient Song has challenged that by telling everyone that no matter what, you'll never be turned away. Regardless of what your socioeconomic standing is, you should be able to be offered quality doula care, like across the board. We deal from everything that's considered quote unquote high risk. So I think about high risk, think about also the social determinants that make something high risk. African American women in New York City are 12 times more likely to have some sort of infant or maternal death, and that's within the first year, right? So either a complication or something that happened in pregnancy where the mother did not make it, or the child dying within the first year of life, right? That's how infant and maternal mortality is calculated. And people are starting to try to attribute it to stress, levels of stress and racism. If we see how stress affects the brain and how it can change someone's genes and DNA makeup to the point where they're no longer the same individual and the individuals that they're birthing are no longer the same. Well, what does that mean for a cycle of people who have consistently been put in a stressful environment? It's something else where you have to consistently be consciously aware of your surroundings all the time. That's stress. So, you know, and that impacts the way in which we birth our babies, you know, low birth weight babies, preterm deliveries. And when you're under a high impact or load of stress, it can make you go into labor early. You know, it can cause other complications. And it's sad. It's sad because it shouldn't necessarily have to be like that. So we've been working with other organizations for a while now, since about 2010. There's the New York Coalition for Doula Access that has kind of partnered and tried to get together to petition Medicaid to be able to cover these costs. And we're still in the process of trying to do so, to see that happen. Because it is a service that is necessary. And if I could find another word for what it is that our particular brand of doulas does, then I would. Because, you know, I see the doula as preventative care.
That was fascinating.
I love it. I
want
wanna
to
join.
Stuff I never even considered
I know.
before. The birth business.
The business of birthing.
That was the Ricky Lake documentary. It might be on Netflix now. The business of being born. She goes way into all of that.
Yeah?
Birthing. Yeah.
Wow.
She knows
Shout
a lot
out to
about
Ricky
birthing
Lake.
babies. Yeah. We've got one about to pop in this studio behind the camera, though. But
I know.
From natural childbirth, now we're going to move on to knitting. A company called Woolen, spelled W-O-O-L-N, and no E, has an unusual business model. It hires mostly retired women, plus so far one man, the token guy there, to do the knitting. The two partners handle the business end, while the group of older folks get a chance to earn extra income by doing something they'd probably be doing anyway. Check it out.
Knitting is like a very special skill, and not everybody is able to do it. And I guess experienced people who've been knitting for a long time actually are the ones who make it the best. And it's always nice to have a nice sweater, a nice hat that has been hand knitted by someone else.
I'm Margot. I'm Faustine. And we are the founders of Woolen. Je suis Margot. Je suis Faustine. Et nous sommes les fondatrices de Woolen.
So Faustine and I met here in New York. We had a few years in the same city, but we had to come to New York to meet. We met through a friend, and she said, "Oh, maybe you should meet. You will get along." And we actually did, and we met 3 times. And then she asked me, "You know, this project you talked about, you know, having some nice grandmothers, skilled and talented grandmothers knitting for you. That's a great idea." And I said, "No, I don't have the guts." And she said, "I will be your guts." And so that's the way it started.
Working with older people is kind of innovative in today's society and economy. Like, it feels to us that seniors are kind of left apart and retirees, so once they're out of the workforce, like, we don't even see them anymore or take so much care about them. Woolen is a way to welcome them back into the workforce, into the economy, into doing something valuable, something that people are going to want to buy. Also, I feel like being away from home, away from our families, we don't have our grandparents here, we don't have our parents here or aunts, so it's kind of like we have to have that intergeneration feel somehow, and we've recreated it here by having all those senior leaders around us, and we've managed to have this great community. Yeah, I feel very lucky to be surrounded by having the opportunity to share more with older people as well.
My grandmother taught me how to knit when I was probably about 6 or 7 years old. I won't tell you how old I am now, but I've been knitting for a long time. And then I kind of fell out of the habit of knitting when I began to travel a lot for my job. When I was working, I would have to take very long flights. I found knitting to be very calming and very soothing, and it's something to focus on and concentrate on instead of like you're sitting on the tarmac thinking, when is this plane going to take off? You're productive and your mind is on that instead of on irritating things. So I knit all the time. I knit every day, whether I'm doing a project for Woolen or I'm doing a project for myself. You know, if you sit on the couch and watch TV at night, you might as well have something to show for it at the end of the evening. So I knit.
One day, actually, I was really tired and really nosy. So I sat down and I was playing with my phone. I'm like, oh, let's see what's going on Craigslist. And then I was like, wait, knitting? Are you kidding me? Knitting? I can do that. Let me just reply and see where it takes me. And so here we are today. I think there should be more cross-generational initiatives because it gives everybody a purpose. It gives everybody community.
We have very good relationships with our leaders, obviously. Hollis, we met through a senior center in Manhattan, and Charmaine, we actually met her on Craigslist. The way it works, we first meet the knitter, and then we explain the project, we come up with the needles and yarn, have a first round just like to test and to see like, can you make a hat or can you make a snood? And then we meet like a week later, and if we're happy, if everyone's happy, we just like keep going and give them more yarn and more patterns.
I'm not saying that we French people do better with our senior people, but we tend to maybe integrate them more in our life. We listen to what they're saying, we value their experience, we value their knowledge, and we definitely had this into consideration when building up Woolen. I mean, I'm going to talk on a knitting point of view because this is my thing. I've been in the knitting business for a long time, and this is my passion. I mean, I started once and then I got hooked. I never stopped. I think when you start knitting and you like it, you can't leave it. You just knit every day. You just go for it. And we came across so many talented people that they're able to make those amazing sweaters, hats, or so many things with their hands, but nobody knows about it, nobody really values it. But how wonderful it is to get like a sweater or a hat that's been handmade by someone, and it's so nicely done.
Woolen.
We see you, Charmaine.
Yes, yeah, looking good.
Send a brother a hat. It's hard to fit sometimes.
I want this one. I want in here.
We got friends in low places. All right.
Well, It Takes a Village Africa is a nonprofit organization that promotes education, agriculture, and healthcare programs in Liberia, which is where our next two guests are from originally. Now living in Brooklyn in 2014, these sisters have partnered with the Educational Ministry of Liberia to help farmers accumulate 800 acres of farmland, help build and establish a school for 300 children who are victims of the Ebola epidemic, and also provide healthcare education to young girls living in the village.
Well, here to tell us more as we kick off Women's History Month.
Woo!
I knew it was coming. They are making history, right? Our sisters and the organization's co-founder, Yvonne Muna Adebo. Thank you. Welcome to BK Live.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
And Erica Davies is also here. Thanks for joining us, Erica.
Thanks for joining us, you
Thank
two.
you.
So what made you start this organization?
Well, It Takes a Village Africa is actually the brainchild of my mother. She always instilled with us that we need to give back to our community. And since we were little, she's always put things together, and she told us the importance of giving back to Liberia in general. And during the war, we realized it was going to be a tough time for them. But when we went to Liberia with our mother, we realized there's a lot more than just clothes that they would need. They need the basics of education and agriculture, to have food supplies and healthcare.
So we know that mom's at the top of the pyramid, but how do you two work out your sister thing and split up the duties of keeping this thing running?
Well, me and Erica, we're like the yin and the yang.
Okay.
Yeah, we both have the creative side and the analytical side. I focus on the organization and also the objectives and the project and branding.
And I'm the mouthpiece. I go around and I get in people's face. So I deal with partnerships and sponsorships. Yes.
I love it. I love it. And you started with the education initiative for the school. Where are you guys in that process?
The foundation was laid, and we're just we're like 60%, and we just need the funds and to be able to finish the project.
So obviously, we're sitting here in Brooklyn right now, and there's the tale of two cities. There's a lot of disparities here, and a lot of great people doing great work to help kids who live a subway ride away from here. Why is it important to expand that vision and help folks that may not be as immediately present to you, but still have pressing needs?
Well, we believe that Africa matters. It Takes a Village Africa it was built on the proverb, it takes a village to raise a child. And so it's a community effort. Although your community may not be Africa, you're still involved in that global community. So to feed people with agriculture or to give them that education will give those African diasporians that tie to Africa that they truly are yearning for, especially with the internet being so rampant. Giving education to children and also doing farming will build those bridges so people will be able to know what we're doing in Africa and understand that building a community, it can happen at any place. It can happen in Brooklyn, it can happen in Africa, and Africa matters. So that's why Brooklyn should care.
Tell us more about these programs. What do they involve? The Farmer Empowerment Program and the Female Sex Education Initiative. And also we've got some photos going here. If you see anything that you want to talk about, feel free.
If you ever needed a question as to why, tell us what we're seeing, Erica.
Yes. The Farmer Empowerment Program, we have farmers in the community that need the tools. So we decided that why don't we join together and get the tools that they need, get the training that they need so they could grow their own food. And we also focus on I guess is a proverb, but teach a man how to fish. You teach a man how to fish, they'll be able to feed themselves. A lot of people don't want handouts. They want to be able to grow their own food and take care of themselves.
And teach their own children.
And the female sex education is teaching women about sex education, FGM, giving them sanitation napkins, and being able to take care of themselves and know that they have to preventive care.
So what kind of level of commitment are you looking for from anyone who may be watching or sharing this via YouTube? Like, it's not as simple as us going to Home Depot and getting a shovel, but I'm sure you've made it very easy to help folks.
Yes, we want everyone to check out our website. They could go to www.ittaksavillageafrica.org, and they could start their own campaign to be able to fundraise for our organization. Or they'll be able to give in-kind donations and help with the sponsorship because they need sanitation napkins. We need tools. We need children's books. We need toys. We need the necessities to be able to uplift these children and uplift the community so they'll be able to take care of themselves.
So if I have a hookup at a shovel factory or my auntie works for Kimberly-Clark or something, I can connect to your website and then tell my friends, hey, everybody, kick in.
Yes.
You can actually make it happen that easily.
Yes.
Wow.
Very cool.
Yes.
That's an awesome idea.
So it's
on it.
to give
I'm getting on
empowerment
it.
to give empowerment to the people. We give empowerment to the people who can, so that they can do, and then we'll be able to work together and basically go through all the initiatives to make sure that we'll be able to feed the children, teach the adults, put these families back together, and don't have them go outside their community in order to find work. They'll be able to find it there, and all the necessary ingredients will be there for them.
How long have you guys been working on this? What are your immediate steps like? How often do you go? I mean, what are your lives like with this project?
I'm actually leaving at the end of this month.
Okay.
Yes, I'm leaving at the end of this month. That's why it was perfect timing. And the last time I actually came because of the Ebola virus. And I left because I was like, wow, like we couldn't do it all by ourselves. I was like, let me go back to America, especially Brooklyn, and be able to let everyone know what's going on so I could go back and be able to contribute more than what I was doing before.
So we've seen headlines that Ebola has been stomped out in a lot of places. How is it specifically in the Liberian context right now? Where are we?
Well, in Liberia, Ebola is dead, but what it is that the sanitation isn't at the high level it needs to be.
So it's still
so it's still waiting.
Yeah.
So what we need to do is make sure that there's running water, make sure that people are educated on how to protect themselves and prevent these things from happening, and also shelter the children to make sure that they don't get these diseases because they are more exposed to it because they're in these classrooms, they're with each other, and if we're able to have more sanitary conditions, then it wouldn't spread as rampant as it did.
An ounce of prevention.
Yeah, and all the students had it, or from families that were kind of ravaged?
Yes, everyone, like just about everyone lost a family member. So a lot of these children that we're advocating for, they lost their parents. They lost their parents, they lost loved ones, and it also the economic development of the country as well took a hit. And also going back from before the Ebola, we had a 14-year war. So the country was already not as level. We have the first female president, but she could only do so much. That's why it takes a village to raise a child, to be able to come together, come back from America, to go to Africa, to be able to advocate for everyone. Because she's a great president, but we need to be able to stand behind her as well.
And support her. Yeah, and realize that everyone who has an initiative, they need support. And so as much as we support Black Lives Matter, we should support how Africa matters, and we should support how an initiative, if someone comes up to you and say, you know what, we should get together and provide education for these children, then you should be like, yes, and band together and do things together. And that is the community I would like to live in. That's the community my mother has instilled in me. So no matter whether or not I'm in Brooklyn or I'm in Liberia, I'm making sure that I'm always giving back and making sure that education is the top of the matter.
Well, looking at that little muscle man right there, I'm going to ask you guys to share how we can click our way to your website and help out and send you off the right way before you go back to Liberia. Let us know the website and what you need.
Yes. The website is www.ittakesavillageafrica.org, and you could go to the donate, and then it'll give you two options. Either you could donate, or you could go down and it says start your own fundraiser.
Very cool.
And we need to build that school.
All right, there's a school to be built, folks. So I don't know if any of you noticed out there, but it's the start of Women's History Month. I'm the only dude on the set today. I'm just feeling the waves of girl power roll over me. We have some phenomenal lawyers and we have some phenomenal philanthropists who need your help. So go out there and click away.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for being here.
And you can follow us on Twitter at My Village Africa.
All right.
Yeah.
Do that after you send some money. Don't follow them.
Yes.
Send some money.
Or start a fundraiser.
Yes, please.
Wonderful.
So,
thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Our BRIC labs give artists of all different stripes the chance to take a concept and make it a work in progress. They're encouraged to mix media and cross borders, and in a moment, you'll meet the author of a new theater piece that does all that and more. She's part of a company called Built for Collapse. Here's a sample of an earlier work of theirs called A Nuclear Love Affair.
The world will note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a military base. We won the race of discovery against the Germans.
Dearest sweethearts, my most precious children.
We have used it in order to shorten the agony of war.
So much for you to know all that I have come to know.
We shall continue to use it.
Poison men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate.
Your life must teach you too that good cannot flourish in the midst of evil.
All right. Well, the Iranian hostage crisis, other than Ben Affleck's Hollywoodized portrayal in Argo a couple of years back, hasn't really been the subject of that much artistic treatment in the years since it dominated the news and effectively ended Jimmy Carter's presidency. Well, here in America, we've seen even less about how it affected the Iranians themselves.
Right now, Built for Collapse, the company that performed in the clip we just saw, is working on a new work in progress called Red Wednesday. It addresses the story of Iran's political and cultural revolution by interweaving bits and pieces of historical transcripts, interviews, and other primary sources with the original words of our next guest. She is the writer and director and DJ.
Yeah.
Sanaz Qajar, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Welcome. Okay, tell us about DJing.
DJing. I do it as a side hobby, and I DJ'd my one of my best friend's weddings, and since then I've gotten a lot of calls. Yeah,
Really?
It's snowballed. It's a thing I do now.
Well,
Great.
You've also mixed it into the theater and
Yeah.
the dance and the movement and all those visuals. How did you
Boom,
synthesize this work?
So I get really bored in theater a lot of the time because my attention span is short. And so for me to really stay engaged with something, it's got to be moving and shifting constantly with my heartbeat. So I actually direct a lot through rhythm and sound, and then if I'm hearing dialogue and suddenly I'm like, oh, I'm bored. I need something else to like engage me right now. You dance right now.
This is my kind of thing. I would stay awake for this show. I can't tell you how many times I'm like.
Yeah. And but my poor actors, I'm like, no, not that. That's the opposite of that. Try the opposite of that. And that's pretty much the process.
Tell us what Built for Collapse is.
It's a company that I run with my two of my compatriots, Ben Hobbs and Vincent Sanford. And it's basically a way for us to share our point of view of experiencing the world being in our late 20s, early 30s. From both a political and personal space. It's very multidisciplinary, and we tour sometimes. So.
But late 20s, early 30s, that's not exactly like a ripe field for the Iranian revolution and the hostage situation is the American context. So how did you arrive at that as subject matter?
For me, my great uncle was the foreign affairs minister during the hostage crisis in Iran, Sadegh Qobzadeh, and he was actually executed before I was born. And I heard so many stories about him as a hero and then later as a murderer, depending on what side you were listening to. And it sort of it was the inspiration for addressing Iran and America and their very complicated relationship, which goes back ages ago. You know, like they say that the hostage crisis, actually, if you look at it, it goes back to 1953 and the things that happened then. Yeah. And so I thought, well, okay, I'm coming from a personal space. I have all these personal stories from my family, and I also have this incredible research that I've done on other sides of the story. What if I pull this all together and take a look at it from this almost objective, removed space? So that's kind of what inspired me to address it. And it was also right when Rouhani was coming into office and the Green Revolution was happening in Gezi Park. The protests there were happening at Arab Springs. I mean, it just felt like we were in this moment of revolution.
The world was pushing you toward making this work.
Yeah. And have you been here this whole time? Are you from here?
I'm from New York, and no, I'm not. I like to say that, but I was born in the U.S. And then I actually grew up part of my life in Iran. In first grade, my parents got divorced, and I ended up in Iran with my grandparents. And I heard a lot about the revolution growing up. You know, I mean, my family, they say this thing about how trauma moves through the DNA, and
we're just talking about that.
Yeah, Did I miss it? Was it on earlier today?
It's on a video. Go to BRIC TV on the YouTube.
Exactly.
And I feel like I was sort of inherited all this trauma and also these stories that they told me of the trauma they experienced with the hostage crisis, with the Iran-Iraq war. I mean, I had all of this in me, and so yes, I was in
And you've
Iran.
actually been, and so you get to have, you get to weave that in too, because so many people of your generation, of our generation, who are Iranian, have never been, can never go, I mean, don't have that experience, I mean, that may be woven into this piece will really speak to them as well.
Yeah, and I'm very, very lucky to have had the experience of being in Iran. And it's a beautiful culture, and it's a beautiful country. And I had the opportunity to learn the language and really immerse myself, and they're not very different at all from any of us. And
we never are.
Yeah, right? You know, and it's like, well, if I'm standing on the border and I can see that side and I can see that side, which I do with my mother and my father a lot, you know, like it's the same thing, you know, looking at it from this lens, how can I find the commonalities? And it comes back to something I think you guys were saying in the earlier segment about how we are all this global community, and that's my philosophy about it.
So that's a lot that you just laid on us, and all of that manifests itself in a 90-minute?
In like a 90-minute extravaganza.
We love an extravaganza.
Yeah.
What are the different mediums used in this piece?
I mean, media is a huge part of it in terms of film and projections work. It's a character in the show. We loaded in last week, and we've been in tech the whole time. We like to rehearse with lights and sound, and they're in conversation with the actors. And there's huge dance pieces inside of it. Straight dialogue, absurdism. I mean, I try to pull out everything I possibly can.
This is why I love the BRIC Lab.
I know.
So when can we finally get a peek?
March 4th and 5th at 7:30, we're going to be having our showings, and I feel like it's going to be a show. You know, we'll see.
It sounds like it's going to be a show.
It's going to be
an extravaganza
spectacle. And there's also feedback session afterwards where we talk with the audience, and I really want to hear. That's the big thing right now. I don't know what the audience's role is, and as a theater maker, it's so key.
Feel the room.
Yeah, so we need people there to tell us what their experience is.
March 4th and 5th.
Yeah.
Come down to the BRIC House, make your way to the BRIC Lab. You can go on our website, bricartsmedia.org, and get all the details to find yourself in the room.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Sanaz, for joining us, and good luck with your piece. It sounds incredible.
Right. The girl power is still working. Girl power is still working. Well, it is Super Tuesday, which means tomorrow will be What It All Means Wednesday. We're gathering a small group of local political reporters to talk about what the donkeys and the elephants will be left standing and what the outcome might mean for the upcoming New York State primary.
Then profiles of two very, very different writers. Armando Suarez Cobian is a Cuban poet and novelist who has been living in Williamsburg for close to 2 decades. We'll show you his Brooklyn stomping grounds and hear him describe the city he grew up in, Havana. Our other author hasn't even hit 1 decade. That's right, Anaya Willibus is 9 and the youngest writer to ever get a chapter book published.
Once again, another girl making me feel like I've not done enough with my life. Then Michael Bellamy is going to introduce us to 3 football players from the Grand Street campus, all good enough to have become the first from their high school to ever sign with college programs. And then we move on to poetry and music again to preview an event called Dominicans Love Haitians. That's how local artists from 2 nationalities who happen to share one island, a very troubled relationship, will express what they have in common, not what divides them.